as I always did throughout this course, I'm going to briefly preface, explain, summarize what we have learned in the first 6 lives of this color course. So first, we talked about the fact that there are colors in Korean that can be nouns and adjectives. However, there are also nouns that can only be nouns. And we also technically answered the question, well, if that's the case, does it mean that I'm severely limited when it comes to how I can use colors if I have a color that can only be a noun? Does it mean that I cannot use that color in situations where I would have used a color as an adjective in English, for example? Well, of course, the answer was no, right? We learned a couple of technical alternatives that will enable us to use colors that can only be nouns in all situations without having to change it into an adjective. Okay, and then we focused on nuance variations, usually colors that can be adjectives. Yes, they have a lot of nuance variations, right? And the reason why these nuance variations were a little bit tricky was because you don't get a hint or clue that describes exactly what version of red you're talking about, what version of blue you're talking about. If you see the word for the first time, then you don't know it. So there are no clues or hints that will enable you to deduce what kind of exactly blue we're talking about. Nothing describes it. So you either know the word or you don't. That's it. Okay, and then we looked into a couple of, well, indications, right? Sometimes you don't actually see a word for a color. Sometimes, yeah, you see an indication in the form of just one syllable attached to some kind of a noun as a part of that noun to indicate that whatever noun that is, yes, is colored in blue or red or whatever it is, whatever indication you're looking at. Okay, so sometimes you can tell the color of something by an indication. So you don't actually have a color word, just a syllable that is a part of that word. Okay, and then we looked into a couple of variables, right? A very unique version of white and black. Yes, usually if you have a color that can be an adjective, it usually means that, of course, it can be predicative adjectives and also attributive adjectives. But there were very unique words, right? A version of white, a version of black. They were very unique in the sense that they can only be used as an attributive adjective. Okay, and then we looked into how are we going to say the word color? Of course, if you want to talk about colors, how do you say yellow? How do you say red? How do you say green? Well, before all of that, you want to know how to say the word color. Okay, so we looked into in large 6 versions of the word color. Okay, and then, yes, we are in the middle of taking all of that together and practicing, right? So that's what we're going to do today as well. So those who have the PDF file, if you go to page number 12, yes, we have 3 more sentences, well, 3 more conversations, I should say, to practice with. Okay, so let's go through number 5. Okay, now, because the main topic is colors, it's not about sentence, well, grammar well, of course, whatever we're talking about, always we will have to technically break things down. But what I'm trying to say is, when it comes to things that we have been doing almost every day, when we weren't going through the color course, I'll try not to spend too much time on it so that we can spend more time talking about colors. Okay, but, well, no worries. Even though I'm going to speed through it, well, a lot of you who have been attending these lives for a very long time, yes, would be able to keep up because, yes, technically breaking things down, that's what we do here. Okay, so now we have a reverse bridge if. So it is blue, you look well carefully in parentheses. So we're going to have the order between the 2 sentences reversed, right? It is blue. So let's say we're taking a look at something, we're looking at something, and I'm telling my 친구, hey, look carefully. If you look carefully, you would notice that it's blue. So as a way of saying that, I'm going to say it is blue if you look carefully. Okay, but well. Okay, so I'll quickly break things down. So, first of all, yes, we have a reverse bridge. So we're going to say, you look well, as a way of saying carefully first. Now, why am I saying well? Now let's talk about in large the two reasons why you would say carefully in English. Number one, you can be using carefully really as a way of indicating avoiding potential danger, right? So for example, I'm going to say something like, hey, walk carefully, whatever, drive carefully when it is snowing. Well, that means I'm saying avoid potential danger because when it's slippery, it's easier to get into a car accident, and a car accident is danger. So when I say drive carefully when it is snowing, I am using carefully as a way of indicating avoiding potential danger. However, sometimes you can use carefully just to simply indicate that you are paying attention to simply recognize details, right? For example, let's say I'm listening to a song of a singer and I'm going to tell my friend, hey, if you listen really carefully, his voice changed a little bit compared to his last album. In that case, I'm not talking about any kind of potential danger. I'm not saying, yeah, if you listen to it, it might hurt your eardrums. That's not what I'm saying. So in that case, I'm just using it as a way of simply indicating recognizing details. In that case, well, actually, the adverb carefully, 조심히 in Korean, is only used for purpose number one, when you are actually talking about avoiding potential danger. If you are using carefully for purpose number two to indicate recognizing details, then you can use the adverb well. Of course, there are more variables to this, but for now, I'll put it this way, because the main topic is colors. Okay, so that's why I'm going to say 잘, well. Okay, so we're going to start here, right? So 잘, of course, the adverb well first, and then the verb look. Now, a bridge can never ever be an independent standalone, right? It has to become a part of the word right in front of it. So I'm going to give it to look. 잘, so look, 보다. But of course, I don't want its display form. I don't want the ta ending. I'm going to give it the if ending. And the if ending belongs to inflection route number two, right? What are the rules of inflection route number two? The rules are, if you remove ta and it ends with a vowel, the display form ends with the vowel, you can immediately attach it. No irregular middle section. So, 잘 보면, if look well, and then, of course, no it. Of course, I'm calling something it because we know what we're talking about, right? It's too obvious. And no is, am, was, were, are. And then we have the predicative adjective blue. The question is, can I use blue as a predicative adjective? Can I do that technically? Biani, welcome back. Can I use blue as a predicative adjective, or do I have to change it into the noun? It is the color blue. Do I have to change it, or can I just keep it as it is? Ali, hello? Keep. Okay. So blue. So can blue be an adjective? Or can it just be a noun? Pablo, thank you. Exactly, yeah, it can be an adjective. So why change it? I can just use it as a predicative adjective then. Okay, so blue is one of the colors that can be an adjective, right? So let's say this time, my friend. So this time, let's say, I'm just going to use the basic form. I'm not going to use a very specific version. Let's just say 파랗다. Okay, so no need to change it. Blue happens to be a color that can be an adjective. 파랗다. Okay, but of course I don't want its display form. I don't want the ta ending. I want the yo ending, the actual form, present tense ending. So let's go to inflection route number one. Okay, so we have a display form of an adjective that ends with the H consonant once ta is removed. Okay, in this case, in inflection route number 1, that is, outside of a couple of exceptions, there's a very specific list of exceptions, right? But if you don't have one of those exceptions, then you apply a 4-step formula. If I had one of the exceptions, it would have been a 3-step formula, but once again, we don't have one of the exceptions. So I'm going to remove ta, remove the h, and then I'm going to change the vowel that came right before H into an E or Ye. Okay, so how do I know? So if that vowel is Ya or Yo, then change it into Ye. If it's anything other than Ya or Yo, change it into E. Okay, so I'm going to change it into E because it's not Ya or Yo. So pare, and then I can attach the ending. 파래요, 파래요, 파래요. So now I have the basic form of blue in its predicative adjective form. Why? Why was that possible? Because I have blue. It wouldn't have been possible if I had the color purple, for example, right? Okay, because purple cannot be an adjective. Okay, so my friend is going to say, it is blue if you look well, if you look carefully. Sorry. 잘 보면 파래요. 잘 보면 파래요. Okay, so now I'm going to answer. Really? Oh, it is blue. Okay, so really? Okay, and then I'm going to take a close look and I'm going to say, oh, yeah, it is blue. You're right. Okay, so first, yes, in this case, we're not saying a sentence, we're just saying one word. So can I say 진짜? Of course not. This is a mistake that I see all the time. All the time. Okay, so now, usually a sentence ends with a verb, a predicative adjective, or a subject complement plus ending mark. Okay, so now verbs and predicative adjectives are inflected. They are given an ending. And when you are speaking honorifics, also known as 존댓말, yes, those endings will usually have a yo somewhere. And also, if you are ending with a subject complement plus ending mark, those ending marks also have yo somewhere, usually, right? If you are speaking honorifics, such as 이에요. So it means that if you are ending a sentence with a verb, predicative adjective, or subject complement plus ending mark, you naturally end up with yo. Okay, but what if you're just saying a word, for example? Then you're not ending with one of these. So in that case, does it mean that you can just say really? Of course not. Then you just have to give it a yo yourself. 진짜요? 진짜요? Okay, if you are speaking honorifics, also known as 존댓말, also known as formal Korean, but what do I always say? That is one of the biggest misconceptions that is not being solved. I thought that over time it would be cleared up a little bit, that misconception, but I don't think it's getting any better. So 존댓말 has nothing to do with being formal. Okay, but anyway, when you are speaking honorifics, yes, even if you are saying a single word, you just have to give it yo yourself then. 진짜요? Okay, now it has nothing to do with being formal, 존댓말, but it is rude if you don't speak 존댓말 when you didn't have the verbal agreement with the person you're talking to speak in 반말 with one another. So, what is the only time you move on from 존댓말 to 반말? Well, when you have that verbal agreement, right? So, yes, if you don't have that agreement, then of course I should be speaking 존댓말. And when I'm speaking 존댓말, and just because I have one word, I don't place 요, then that makes it rude. That makes it very rude. So, now, think of it like this. Now, unfortunately, there's kind of no way around it, sounding rude, that is. Of course, Everyone would know that, yes, if you are a foreigner, obviously, of course they would know that, they would take into consideration that, yes, you must have made a mistake. However, think of it this way. Let's say someone is learning English, and someone told them when they were learning English that, yes, if you want someone to lower their voice a little bit, the polite way of asking is to say, shut your effing mouth up. Let's say someone told this person, say it like that. That's a very polite and formal way of asking someone to lower their voice a little bit. Okay, so I obviously know that this person does not speak fluent English. So I can tell that, yes, someone must have given you misleading information. But this person really believes that that's how you say it. So this person keeps on saying, can you please shut your effing mouth up? But I can sense that you're not really picking a fight. You really believe that that's how you say it, to be polite. Okay, so even if I know that it's a mistake, still, I cannot help but feel uncomfortable. Does that make sense? That's what happens if you don't place yo. That's what happens. I know that it's a mistake, but I still can't help but feel uncomfortable. So even if I know that this person is a very wholesome person, I know that you don't mean to swear, I still can't help but feel uncomfortable here. Okay, so that's one of the biggest reasons why people can shy away from conversations, Koreans that is. Because I feel a little bit, of course, it's no one's fault, but as a Korean who doesn't break down the language as a job, I don't know how to explain it, and I don't want to force people to say like, oh, you have to say it like this. So yes, I don't want to be rude by forcing someone how to speak in a certain way, and even if I were trying to do it, I don't know how to explain it technically. So that's why sometimes people could just shy away from having a conversation in Korean. So just because you're saying one word, you still have to keep 요 if you are speaking 존댓말. Okay, so 진짜요? And then, oh, it is blue. Of course, we're talking about it. And of course, no is, am, was, were, are. Okay, so now we're saying oh. Now it means that I am imbuing the nuance of realizing or noticing something right now spontaneously, right? We know an ending that can imbue that nuance, right? But before using that nuance, let's take a look into blue. So, which version of blue should I use in this case? Which version? Yes, I see an answer. This is why I always say, when you're speaking Korean, you have to. I'm not saying you should. It's good to do this. You have to. You have to close your eyes and you have to imagine that you are in the situation. Now, the clue is, yes, I'm going to use either number 3 or 6. 3 or 6. Because my friend said, if you look carefully. So if it was a very vivid version of blue, he wouldn't have said, you would notice that it's blue if you look carefully, because it's obviously blue. So if my friend said, hey, take a close look carefully, then you would know that it's blue. So I did. It really required me to look carefully to notice that it's blue. Then I see that it must be that the blue, whatever version of blue we're talking about, is not very vivid. So yeah, it's either 퍼렇다 or 푸르스름하다. Okay, so am I looking at it as something negative? Of course, that depends. Let's say like, yeah, someone is bruised. Of course, in that case, it's something negative. But let's say in this case, it's not something negative necessarily. I'm just saying, at first I didn't know that it's blue. I have to look carefully to know that it's blue. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to use 푸르스름하다. Okay, so that's why I always say it's not about translating words. It's about grasping the situation. The situation heavily decides how you will say what you want to say. Okay, does that make sense? That's why I'm going to use 푸르스름하다. Okay, so that's why it's always up to you to study. If you, yes, try to look something up for the right translation, whatever source it is online. Now, either two things happen. Either whatever source you're going to, whether it's I don't know, ChatGPT or translator, it should say, if it's responsible, it should say, I don't know. If you say, how do I say it is blue if you look well, carefully, and I want to say really, oh, it is blue, it should say, I don't know, because what version of blue are you talking about? And plus, you need this context. My friend told me to look carefully. In that case, what version of blue should I use? So, yes, two things happen. Either you get like a very lazy answer, or you can get a responsible answer, but you get this. Explaining everything. Well, it depends on the context, because your friend told you to look carefully. Well, it indicates that, yes, the version of blue that you are using must not have been that very vivid, because if it was vivid, then your friend wouldn't have said, yeah, look carefully. And first of all, this kind of a conversation would not have taken place, or something like that. And of course, yes, when you're looking up something, well, you're looking for convenience. And if that's what you get, that kind of defeats the purpose, right? Yeah, I looked it up because I want convenience, but I'm getting a paragraph. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose then. Yeah, so it's always up to you to study and be ready to go. So you have to have a lot of tools in your toolbox. Take out the right tool effortlessly whenever, yes, you need one, according to the situation, according to the context, according to the nuance. Okay, so I'm gonna say, 푸르스름하다. But of course, I don't want a display form. I don't want 다. Okay, Callie, thank you. Okay, so yes, I don't want 다. I want the ending that imbues the nuance of noticing or realizing something right now spontaneously. Just like when you say oh in English. So yes, a no route ending, 네요, right? So I'm gonna say, yeah. Oh, okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, 푸르스름하네요. Okay, so now I used 네요 as a way of imbuing the nuance of realizing or noticing something right now spontaneously. So that's why I say it's very similar to saying oh in English. Now, well then, is there nothing like oh? So O is an interjection, right? The O's, the ahs. Okay, so I used this so that because it has a similar function to O, but is there no interjection that is exactly the equivalent of O? Actually, there is. You can say ah. Okay, and when usually people say use the interjection ah as a way of saying oh, yes, usually their tone goes up a little bit, ah, and then drops a little bit at the end, ah. So they would say ah, 푸르스름하네요. Okay, so I used two things to indicate that I am realizing, noticing something right now as I'm speaking. Number one, I used this interjection, ah, and then I also used this ending that imbues the nuance of realizing, noticing something right now. So I did two things. I placed two things to make sure that that nuance is delivered. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Okay. That's perfect. Now let's move on to 6. So A says, these curtains are a little dirty. Okay, so they used to be snow white. Okay, but let's say they got a little bit dirty. So they, yeah, became a little yellowish, let's say. Okay, so first let's say these curtains are a little dirty. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Ooh, wait, let me just check. Okay, nothing broke. I'm sorry about that. That must have hurt your ears. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so these curtains, the subject. And let's say we're looking at the curtains. So let's say the plural is too obvious. And no is, am, was, were, are, and no us and thus. So we have the adverb little and we have the predicative adjective dirty. Okay, so we don't have a color here. Okay, so yes, of course, we're going to first start with the subject. Now, of course, you have to know which version of this you will use, right? 이거, 이거, and 이것. So which version of this would you use in this case? Exactly, yes. I would use E. Why? Because E is the version of this that you would use when you are placing it in front of some kind of a noun. For example, I can say, I bought this marker today. Then I would use E because I'm placing it in front of marker. But if I'm just saying, I bought this today, then I'm using this alone as the noun. Then it's either 이거 or 이것, right? And of course, yes, what's the extra S then? Of course, in poetic Korean, you can just keep it for no reason whatsoever, just because you want to. Okay, but in real spoken Korean, you only keep it in 3 cases and only in those 3 cases for now, right? But right now, we're not even going to talk about it because it's not the version of this that we will use. Okay, so E, and then curtain. So curtain will just be curtain. 이 cotton, and then a little 조금, and then yes, what do I always say? I'm sure that some of you are sick and tired of hearing me say this, but that's how it's supposed to be. So when you're learning colors, it means that 1% energy colors and 99% inflection, also known as conjugation, right? When you're talking about numbers, 1% of your energy goes to numbers, 99% inflection. If you're talking about, let's say, pronunciation, 1% goes to pronunciation and 99% inflection. Okay, because learning all of this is useless if you can't inflect the word that will end the sentence. Right? Okay. So 더럽다, a version of dirty. Okay, so, but I don't want its display form. I'm going to inflect it and give it the yo ending, the actual form, present tense ending, right? So let's go to inflection route number 1. So we have the be situation, right? When you have the be situation, once again, you have to divide the situation into 2. When you have verbs and when you have adjectives. And yes, we have an adjective. Dirty. Okay, so yeah, you have a display form of an adjective that ends with be once ta is removed in inflection route number 1. In this case, outside of enlarge for exceptions, we're going to apply a 4-step formula, right? If I had one of the 4 exceptions, I would have applied a 3-step formula, but 더럽다 is not one of those 4 exceptions. So I will apply a 4-step formula. Remove ta, remove be, place 워 as the irregular middle section, and then attach the ending. Okay, so remove ta, remove be, and then place 워 as the irregular middle section, and then attach the ending. So now I have 더러워요, 더러워요, 더러워요. Okay? Okay. Wait, where's the color board? Okay. So 이 컷은 조금 더러워요. 더러워요. Okay, so now I have the whole 문장. 천천히 읽을게요. 이 컷은 조금 더러워요. Okay, so now B is going to answer, oh, they really are yellow. Of course, yes, because something, it used to be Snow White, but yes, got a little bit messy, dirty. Okay, so in this case, yes. Oh, they really are yellow. So once again, we have O, so you can use the neo ending again, or you can use the interjection ah. Okay, so they really are yellow. Okay, so of course no they, of course we're talking about the curtains, and no are, and now yellow. Of course this is not yellow, but because if I write it in yellow, you might not be able to see it. Just imagine that this is yellow. Okay, yellow. So in this case, of course, I can first say really, the adverb really, 진짜. I'm not going to use 정말, right? 진짜. And then yellow. So which version of yellow? That's the question. Okay. So, yeah, which version of yellow would I use? Of course, I'm not saying only one is the absolute answer and all of the others are, yes, wrong answers. The second? Yeah, I would say 2, 3, and 4, they all work, right? Because we're literally saying dirty. Yeah, so I can use the 누렇다 version. Okay, that's perfect. Yeah, that works too. If I want to make it sound a little bit playful, then I can say 누리끼리 하다 to make sure that I don't sound like super serious. Okay, or now, let's say, yeah, these curtains used to be Snow White, but it did get a little bit dirty. Just because it gets a little bit dirty, it's not going to turn this yellow, right? So I'm just saying it's a little yellow. Okay, so not very vivid also works. Unless you pour like mustard on the curtains, I don't think it would turn into like a very vivid kind of yellow. So not very vivid also works. So I'm not going to say one is absolutely the answer and all the other versions don't work. Yeah, so all of you have the answer. So yeah, let's just say 누리끼리 하다. Just to practice. I can use other versions too. They all work. But let's say I don't want to sound super serious, so I'm going to make it sound a little bit playful. So 누리끼리 하다. But of course, I don't want the ta ending. Yeah, so for the O nuance, the nuance of realizing or noticing something right now, let's use the neo ending. Okay, so if my friend says, 이 커튼 조금 더러워요, I can say, oh yeah, I guess you're right. They really are yellow. 진짜 누리끼리 하네요. Okay, so I used the dirty but playful version of yellow. Okay, so I am acknowledging that it is a little dirty, but I'm not saying, oh my god, this is a serious situation. I'm so upset. I'm making sure that I don't sound like that. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Okay. Now, thank you for the colorful disco TikTok ball. Yes, I'm not sure what to call it. Thank you, 감사합니다. Yeah, okay. So, anyway. Yeah. So, let's move on to the last conversation. So A says, I have to find a big bag. So A is trying to pack something, and in order to pack all the stuff, A needs a big bag. Now, let's say a big bag is right there. A is looking at it. So B is saying, there's a big bag, there's a purple big bag right there. So B is saying there's a big bag of the color purple. Why are we saying it like this? Why aren't we just saying there is a purple big bag, big purple bag? Why aren't we saying that? Because purple cannot be an adjective, right? Purple happens to be a color that can only be a noun. So, yes, if you want to say purple bag, you have to say bag of the color purple and use the noun, the color purple. Okay, so that's why B is saying there is a big bag of the color purple. So A says, yeah, I know that, yes, but a black bag is needed this time. So once again, we're going to use 필요하다. And why am I not saying I need a big bag? I'm sorry, I need a black bag? Because 필요하다 is not the verb need, it's the adjective needed. Okay, so yeah, let's try to then build these sentences. Exactly, noun only. So A says, hey, I have to find a big bag. I need a big bag, so I have to find one. I know that there's a big black bag somewhere in this house. Okay, so yes, of course, no I and no right? And we're going to give the find verb, the have to ending. And then, yes, we're going to look at big bag as, yeah, the object, right? Okay, so we need an attributive adjective, an adjective that you place in front of a noun. Okay, so let's start with the object, big bag, 크다, the display form of the adjective big, right? 크다. But once again, I don't want its display form. I don't want it. I want its attributive adjective form. And that ending is the N ending, right? And because it belongs to inflection route number 2, I applied the rules of inflection route number 2. What are the rules? If the display form ends with a vowel, once that is removed, you can immediately attach it. So that's why we end up with 큰. So big, but in its attributive adjective form. Okay, and then bag, a version of bag, 가방. And then 찾다, the verb find. Okay, but once again, I don't want its display form. Not sure if we can make it have enough space. Let's try. I don't want the ta ending, I want the have to ending. Okay, so let's go to this time inflection route number 1. Okay, so the have to ending belongs to inflection route number 1, right? That's why we're here. And we have a situation where the display form that we are using ends with a J. In this case, you apply a 3-step formula, right? Okay, so remove ta, of course, place a or all as the irregular middle section, and then 드디어 attach the ending. Okay, so yeah, remove ta. Of course, it's going to be a, right? Not all this time. 찾아, and then 야 돼요. Now I can attach the ending. So now I have to find. Okay, have to find. Exactly. So 찾아야 돼요. Have to find. Okay, so now I can actually use it because a display form, I cannot actually use it. Okay, so first A is going to say I have to find the big bag. 큰 가방 찾아야 돼요. 큰 가방 찾아야 돼요. Okay, so B is going to say, well, you're looking at one. There's a big purple bag right there. But because purple can't be an adjective, we're going to say there is a big bag of the color purple. Okay, so the color purple. Okay, so yes. Now, whenever you are saying there is or there isn't, yes, we're going to look at it as a predicative adjective, and whatever you're talking about, what is there, that will be given the subject position. Okay, so of connects two nouns, right? Big bag and the color purple. And once again, when you're using of to connect two nouns to its left and to its right, keep three things in mind. Number one, do not separate them when it comes to part of speech. If one is the subject, they are all together the subject. And number two, have the order between the noun here to its left and to the noun to its right reversed. Okay, so we're going to say color purple first. And number three, don't actually say of. There is a way of saying of, but it's too poetic, right? Okay, so we're going to say color purple big bag. So what is the color purple? 보라색. And then big bag. 보라색 큰 가방. And then 있다, there is. But now I gave you a clue that tells you what ending I will use. I said, yeah, it's right there. We're both looking at it. So I'm saying, what are you talking about? Yeah, it's right there. You see a big bag right there. So if that's the case, what kind of an ending would I use? Exactly. Yes. I'm going to use the 잖아요 ending. The nuance ending that imbues the nuance of I am saying something that you already know as well, or at least should know as well. So I'm saying, do you not see that? Yeah, do you not see that right there? There's a big bag right there of the color purple. Exactly. So I'm going to use the 잖아요 ending. So 보라색 큰 가방 있잖아요. Okay, so if my friend says, yeah, 큰 가방 찾아야 돼요, but obviously there's a big bag right there of the color purple, I'm gonna say 보라색 큰 가방 있잖아요. Okay, and then A will say, yeah, I know that, yes, but a black bag is needed this time. Okay. As a way of saying, I need a big bag this time. Okay, so first we're going to say 네, yes, but a big bag is needed this time. Okay, so now, yes, of course, yes, 네. Let's first start with that. It's not even a part of the 문장, right? Okay, so there are, of course, a whole bunch of ways of saying but. But right now, let's just use a basic form that is colloquial. Of course, we're not going to use a poetic version. Okay, so 근데 would usually be the safest bet. Of course, at some point, we will have to learn a couple of more versions. Okay, so what I'm not going to do is 하지만. Okay. So, 근데, and then, of course, no us and thus, no is, am, was, were, are, and then because I am using an attributive adjective, yes, that's why I'm placing it in front of a noun, right? The question is, can I use black as an attributive adjective or not? Exactly. Yes. Black happens to be a color that can be a noun. That can be an adjective. Okay. For example, if it was orange, I couldn't have done that, right? If it was orange or green or purple or brown or gray, then I couldn't have said gray bag, orange bag. I had to figure out another way of doing it. But black happens to be a color that can be an adjective. Okay, so, well, yeah, I can use a nuance variation if I were to give off some kind of a nuance. But let's say this time I'm not going to give off any kind of a nuance. So I can either use 까맣다, but we have a very unique version of black, right? Which is 검다 as well. 검다 was very unique, right? In the sense that it can be an adjective, but only an attributive adjective. That's very rare. Because usually, if you have an adjective, of course it means that it can be used in both ways, as a predicative adjective and also as an attributive adjective. But 검다 and 희다, these versions of white and black, they are very, very unique. You can only use it as an attributive adjective. Well, it doesn't matter anyway, because I am using an attributive adjective. So I can, if I'm not going to give off any kind of a specific nuance, I can use 검다 or I can use 까맣다. Okay, so let's say, well, let's use both versions then. Let's see how it's going to be inflected. 까맣다. Okay, so now we are in inflection route number 2, right? Because we need the attributive adjective ending. So we have the H situation first with 까맣다. Okay, so once again, if I have one of the exceptions, I would have applied a 3-step formula. Well, a different 3-step formula. But because 까맣다 is not one of the exceptions, I will apply this 3-step formula. Remove 다, remove the H, and then attach the ending. Those are the rules of inflection route number 2. If it was 1, then it would have been different. Why are we in route 2? Because of the ending that we're using. So remove 다, remove the H, and then I can attach the N. 까만, 까만. Okay, 까만. So, and then 까만, 가방. Okay, now this would have been the standard way of doing things. Subject first, time second, and then predicative adjective last. But, yes, now I can switch the order of words if I were to take into consideration the general theme of Korean grammar, right? Which is, the later it appears, the more important it is. So, what if I really want to emphasize black bag? Because my friend keeps saying, well, you have a purple bag right there. Why are you looking for a bag? So I'm going to say, oh yeah, I know that. I know that there's a big purple bag that I can use right there. But this time, I need a black bag. So I'm really going to emphasize black bag. So what am I going to do? I'm going to drag it all the way here so that it appears after this time. Okay, exactly. Say this time earlier. Okay, so 2번, this time. But once again, when you're using time words, be careful. Now, usually when you have a time word, a lot of times in English you have in, on, at, right? Like in the morning, at night, on Christmas, or something like that. Yes, well, if that's the case, yeah, also in Korean, you should attach something like 에, 아침에, so that it can play the role of in the morning. Okay, but there is a variable, right? Usually in English, if you have last, this, or next with a time word, they substitute in, on, at, right? You don't say something like, I will go in next year. You just say, I'll go next year. Or you don't say something like, I arrived in last month. You just say, I arrived last month. But in Korean, that's not the case. Even if you are using a word that has last, this, or next built in, you still need in, on, at. So you are actually saying in Korean something like, a black bag is needed in this time. 근데 이번에. Okay, does that make sense? 근데 이번에. So that's why I'm going to keep 에, in this time. Okay, so I'm actually saying in this time. That's why I'm keeping 에. Okay, Jamie, thank you. And then, yes, because I really wanted to emphasize black bag, yes, I waited so that it can appear later. Once again, the general theme of Korean grammar, the more important it is, the later it appears. And then, yes, needed, 필요하다. Once again, it is not the verb need, it's the adjective needed. And we all know why it's so important to always remind yourself that, right? There's a very technical reason to that. I'll explain it if we have some time left. Okay, but anyway, I don't need its display form. I want its actual form in present tense. So I need the yo ending. And the yo ending belongs to inflection route number 1, right? And the rules are, if something ends with ha, then change it into he, and then attach the yo ending. Of course, if it was inflection route number 2, I wouldn't have changed ha into he, right? But we are in inflection route number 1 because the yo ending belongs to inflection route number 1. So we can say 네, 근데 이번에 까만 가방 필요해요. Okay, now, sorry. I technically now have all the words. So I technically now have all the words. Yes, you can download, yes, you have access to the PDF files. If you go to my TikTok bio, you'll see a link. Okay, so now, but I want to use particles this time. Now, am I going to use particles just because I can? Of course not. Using these particles just because you can is what you do in poetic Korean. But we are not going to learn poetic Korean, right? What is poetic Korean? The version of Korean, the format of Korean that is taught. The one that is taught is poetic Korean. And what do I mean by poetic Korean? Well, a lot of sparkles here would already know what I'm about to do, so if it's too cringy, lower the volume or cover your ears or come back a little later. Okay, so poetic Korean is a format of Korean that is the easiest to learn and of course the easiest to teach. However, it makes you sound extremely and intimidatingly poetic. So, for example, let's say I can basically say the same thing in 2 ways. I can say, yeah, I heard what you said. Don't worry. Yeah, I understood. I heard exactly what you said. Or I can say basically the same thing in a very poetic way, and I can say, your message reached my ears through the tantalizing dancing of air, which I call vibration. Okay, does that make sense? So, that's what poetic Korean is. Yes, it sounds intimidatingly poetic. Okay, so if I tell someone something and they say, oh yes, your message reached my ears through the tantalizing dancing of air, which I call vibration. I'm going to say, well, forget what I told you, because, yeah, we're not gonna talk to each other anymore. I'm sorry. Yeah, forget what I just said. Yeah, and forget who I am too. Okay, so, because I'm scared. Anyway, so 네, 근데 이번에 까만 가방 필요해요. So, yes, I'm not going to give it a particle for no reason whatsoever because that's something that I would do in poetic Korean. In real Korean, I really need a very, very specific reason. So, first, I'm going to use a difference particle, also known as topic marker particles, but once again, I said this about 9,000 times by now, right? Calling it topic marker particles only work in an exam format. Exam Korean is structured to be very similar to poetic Korean. So once you step outside of that exam format, you will very quickly realize that, oh, calling them topic marker particles, that just logically does not work anymore. Okay, so I'm going to call them difference particles. Okay, so yeah, I'm saying last time I did use a purple bag, but this time it's different. I need a black bag. That's why I know that there's a purple bag right there, but I'm still looking for the black bag. So I'm going to give it a difference particle, something that indicates that something is different compared to something else according to the context in some sense. Okay, so in what sense? Of course, that lies in the context and situation. Okay, so 네, 근데 이번에는 And then, yes, I'm going to give the subject a subject particle. Why? Because it is a subject? Of course not. Of course not. That's what you do in poetic Korean. I want to give it the subject a subject particle for reason number one, when you're pinpointing. Because when are you automatically carrying a pinpointing nuance? When you are shifting focus point. When someone is focusing here, but they shouldn't be focusing here. They should actually be focusing here. So let's say, actually, my friend should be looking here, but my friend is looking here. So he got it wrong. So I'm going to say, hey, no, it's not there. Look here. So I'm pinpointing for him so that he can shift focus point. So when someone has the wrong focus point and you're shifting focus point for them, then you are automatically carrying a pinpointing nuance. In that case, you can use a subject or object particle. Okay, 이번에는 큰 가방이 필요해요. Okay, so once again, I am not giving the subject a subject particle just because it is a subject. That's just like wearing a cast on your leg just because it is a leg. Okay. It's not injured. Of course, in real life situations, it has to be injured, right? If my friend says, oh, yeah, I just have a cast on. Yeah, because it is what it is. So that'd be a little bit odd, right? Okay, so now, and a little while ago, I said it's very, very important to remind yourself that 필요하다 is not the verb need, right? It's the predicative adjective, as it's the adjective needed. Why is that? What could happen if you take a shortcut? Now, if you're speaking English, it would be a little bit more comfortable to think of you as for you to think of it as need, right? Because in English, you would usually say, I need something, like I need information. I need coffee. I need what? I need whatever. So you would place a noun as the object. Why? Because a verb can modify an object. But in Korean, once again, keep in mind, 필요하다 is not the verb need. If you do take the shortcut just because it's convenient, then you will easily fall into the trap of thinking that I need coffee. When you're saying coffee, coffee is the object because that's how it is in English, right? But no, because it's the adjective needed, what you're saying is, you're not saying I need coffee, you're saying coffee is needed. Of course, for me. Okay, now you could say, well, now, does it really matter? Do I still have to always remind myself whether it's an object or a subject? Well, if you're just going to stay at a very elementary level, and you're only going to say something like, I like summer, I like apples, this is a pen. Well then, yeah, maybe it doesn't really matter. But if you want to advance and you get to a point where you know how to use particles now, well, if you're going to give something a subject, if you're going to give a subject particle or an object particle, you have to know if it is a subject or object, right? So that's why if you think of it as the verb need, you will very easily make the mistake of thinking that it's an object. And if you have a reason to use a particle, you might give it an object particle. That happens all the time. But once again, it's a subject. So therefore, that's why I'm saying 까만 가방이. I gave it a subject particle. Okay, so once again, what happens if you get it wrong then? What if you give a subject an object particle? Does it mean that people don't understand? I think they will understand, but it kind of sounds like this. Let's say someone was trying to say, we don't like coffee in English. But let's say they say, us coffees likes doesn't. So now the grammar is all over the place, right? Now, if someone tells me that, but let's say I have the context and I have the situation to help me understand, I think I can compute the situation and still understand and say, oh, okay, I think you're saying we don't like coffee. Would you like something else then? Okay. But once again, that's what it sounds like. People could understand, but that's not your goal, right? When it comes to learning a language, you want to be fluent. Okay, so that's why no taking shortcuts. At first, because you would say it usually as a verb, it would be convenient to just think of it as the verb need. But what is always waiting for you at the end of a shortcut? Yeah, poetic Korean is drooling and rubbing its hands, saying, oh, another prey that fell into the trap. Always, the bait called convenience always works. Okay. So don't fall, don't become a prey. Okay. Don't fall for the trap. So that's why we're saying 네, 근데 이번에는 까만 가방이 필요해요. So, thanks to all of you, we finished officially the color course. Thank you so much for keeping up.